Welcome to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, a leadership conversation for those not in the driver's seat of their organizations. You can learn by visiting www.backseatleader.com. And now, here are the hosts of the Backseat Leadership Podcast, Jeff Kokenauer and Brad Merchant.
Well, everybody, welcome back to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. If you have not yet listened to the COVID-19 recap episode, is that what we're going to call it?
Yes, something like that.
Something like that. I'm Jeff, and this is my buddy Brad Merchant.
Hey guys.
And we're the hosts of the Backseat Leadership Podcast, which is a podcast that is focused on those who are not in the front seat of their organizations.
Yep.
And the leadership principles, conversations, questions, and issues, we'll go with it. Topics that face backseat leaders, and we'd love for you to be a part of the conversation. So hit us up on social media and also at backseatleader.com, and you can be a part of that conversation. We'd love to hear from you. First of all, before we jump in, a shout out to the One Word Podcast. We'll talk about them a little bit later, but really excited about the things that those guys are doing down there in the Florida land as they journey out into the podcast world. So check them out, the One Word Podcast. Brad has no idea what I'm talking about.
No idea.
But he'll know short
Sure,
enough.
it's great, though.
And speaking of the One Word Podcast, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. But actually it does, and you'll know why if you listen to the podcast, because they're in a season where they're trying to find their best spot, and you can listen to that with them. But, Brad, today we are talking about the back seat and where is your best spot in the back seat, because honestly, there's a lot of people who are asking the question, am I in the right fit? Brad, take us in.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, I wonder if you resonate with this question. You know, have you ever tried to wear shoes that just don't fit?
Yes.
Yeah, I have too. And I think probably a lot of our listeners have too at some point in their life. And, you know, you run into one or two problems if you wear shoes that don't fit.
This illustration is going to be phenomenal.
You think so?
Yes.
Okay, good. So either the shoes are so big that your foot basically swims in the shoe.
True.
And it's hard to walk properly.
Very
right?
difficult
Hard to
to
keep
walk.
the shoe on.
Yeah.
It just feels
Trip.
weird. Totally. Or the shoe is so small that it actually can hurt your foot, even
Absolutely.
leaving blisters or scars in some cases.
Yeah.
All of us have found that to be true. And I think the same is true when it comes to vocation. You know, how many of us have had positions, Jeff, this has been true of us, in an organization where we actually just don't fit the position.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the position's too big or the position's too small, right? Maybe it's because the convictions of the organization just don't line up with yours. You're like, I just don't agree with where the ship is heading, and therefore it's just a bad fit.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the position required you to have a skill set that frankly you don't have yet, or maybe you were paid to do something that you just flat out don't like. You're not passionate about it. And what we want to do in this episode, Jeff, is we want to talk to people that are listening, and we want to answer the question that they might be asking themselves already, even right now as they listen. And that is this: How do I know if I'm in the right role in my organization? Like, how can I know that?
Yeah.
And the way we're going to do that is by asking a couple questions to reflect on that. And these are questions that, Jeff, we've wrestled with personally.
Absolutely.
Questions that we even go back to presently at times. And I think if you're a backseat leader, you will always be asking yourself these questions.
For sure.
And I think that's something you needed to recognize. That's not weird. That doesn't make you unique. It just makes you normal. That's what it means to be a backseat leader, to always ask these questions.
For sure. And before you jump into those questions, I think it's really easy to recognize, or maybe we need to recognize the reality that if you're just tuning in for the first time to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, this is the first episode you've listened to.
Glad you're here.
We are very glad you're here. Like, follow, hit subscribe.
Yep.
And the premise of this podcast is not to help you find the quickest avenue to the front seat. That's not we haven't found an avenue to the front seat that has been provided for us. Also, we're pretty content in the back seat spots that we're in right now. No, the reality is that this podcast is focused on helping you flourish in the seat you find yourself off in the back seat. And so if you're listening to this for the first time, that's the premise of the conversation. The other side of that is if you're listening to this because someone sent it to you and said, hey, I know you're wrestling with where you're at in the organization, that there's probably two directions you have to go from asking that question, am I in the right seat? And it's this. One direction is I want to step up my game for the organization or the spot that I'm in. And then the second reality is the opposite. I want to quit playing for this team.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And so what I want to do before Brad jumps into these two critical questions, is make sure you recognize this conversation is not about helping you decide it's time to go or it's time to stay. Yep. I think that's this conversation, if nothing else, is a helpful aid, an element to that decision-making process. Yep. And we'll talk about some of those variables because we have walked through those things before.
Yep.
But I just want to commit to, at the beginning of this conversation, that this is about finding what's best for the backseat leader in the role that they find themselves in the organization.
Yeah.
That it might be that you are in the right role, but you haven't prioritized the right things. So I just want to press into that a little bit because I think we would both be people who would say longevity produces effectiveness or produces an angle that you get to have. And so jumping from thing to thing is not the answer.
Right.
The grass might look greener over there, but it's because they've watered the grass over there and you haven't seen how they watered it. And it might be some hard work to keep it green.
Right.
And perhaps what this conversation is going to produce is that you need to water the grass where you're at.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
So I say that because I want to be the person, I think we want to be champions of people who are long term in the places they're at. So
that's right.
Brad, with that little caveat, let's press into these two questions and let's ask the question, okay? How do I know that I'm in the right role in my organization?
Yeah. So first question I think we should reflect on in order to answer the initial question is this. Is my role currently meeting legitimate needs within my organization, community, and world? Is my role meeting legitimate needs within my organization, community, and world? And the reason why we want to start with this question, Jeff, is because it's really easy and I think natural for a lot of leaders to determine if they're in the right seat of leadership based upon looking inside themselves. And what I mean by looking inside is by asking questions with a lot of I statements. What am I good at? What am I passionate about? And so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. However, I think what we should do when wondering, am I in the right seat, is by actually looking outside, not inside. Here's what I mean. We should be regularly asking ourselves this question. How am I impacting the lives of people in my current role? Now, this isn't an easy question to answer, right? Because for maybe some backseat leaders that are, one, let me just preface this. For a front seat leader, that's a really easy question to answer, I think. Sure. You're at the head of the organization. If anything, you're impacting the people that are below you, that report to you.
At least.
But usually, because your role is pretty visible, you're in front of people, you're impacting the lives of people. For a backseat leader, though, that's not an easy question to answer sometimes. Maybe you're listening to this, and you actually think, you've been thinking even this week, am I even making a difference in my job? And can I just tell you, you are normal. We all ask that. Jeff, we ask that question in our own roles currently. Maybe, just for a couple examples, maybe you're an assistant to someone, and your main job is to make the life of someone else easier. Mm-hmm. And you're wondering, man, am I making a difference in the lives of people? Maybe you have a role that is so behind the scenes that you think, gosh, am I doing anything impactful with my life? Or maybe you're in a position that is just usually undervalued and totally overlooked by the people around you. Whatever it might be, I want to remind you, you are always impacting people. I don't care what your job is, what your position is, or what seat you have on the bus. You're always impacting people. The question is, how are you impacting them? Are you impacting them for the betterment of their life? Or are you impacting them negatively? Those are good questions to ask. And I think some questions that maybe we can come back to at a later time in this episode, and we've talked about in previous episodes, honestly, is you want to be the kind of person that leaves a lasting mark on the lives of people that are around you. And the way you do that is not by being really competent. Of course, that's helpful. But it's actually by having high character, by being a cheerful person, by having a joyful attitude, not complaining all the time or grumbling or gossiping about other people, being content and not being fueled and filled with discontentment. So I think a question we just need to ask is, okay, in my current seat, am I meeting legitimate needs in the lives of people, my organization, community, and world? Because if I am, friend, you need to know your position is really, really valuable.
Sure, and you wouldn't have a position in the organization if it wasn't important.
Yeah.
Because they would recognize, the front seat leader would say, well, that isn't accomplishing anything for us.
Yep.
We should stop spending money in that area, right? One thing, Brad, I think it's easy as we wrestle through these questions. I assume that backseat leaders enjoy what they do, at least to some degree, and there's probably some things they don't enjoy what they do. We'll talk about that in a minute. There's some younger leaders who are moving up the ranks in the organization that they're working for, and I think it's really important because I think this happens to anybody. I think it happens a lot to youth pastors who I interact with a lot.
Yes.
I think it happens a lot to pastors. I think it happens a lot to founders of organizations. I think it happens a lot to people who are passionate about the organizations they work for. Maybe they work for a nonprofit, and they're passionate about the mission. Perhaps they work for a for-profit organization who's done a phenomenal job of making clear the mission of the organization as more than just turning a profit, but serving a purpose.
Yep.
And if you're a backseat leader that works on some of those, it is easy to begin to find your identity in what you do. And I think it's really important to delineate between, is what you're doing, is the position impacting, from is this your identity? You are not your role. You're not your role. You serve a purpose. You have a purpose for your life, and you have a purpose for your job.
Yeah.
So knowing who you are, what you're on the earth for, and having a idea of the trajectory of your life holistically, not just with your job, helps you begin to frame, I think is the word I'd use, how important the role is to you, so that you can have a better understanding of how the role interacts with the organization.
Sure. Yep.
When you have a context, when you are self-aware, I think we've talked about this before. We've talked about the Enneagram. We've talked about all kinds of different things. When you are more self-aware of how you fit into the role based on your gifts, your passions, your burdens, your skills, you know how you benefit the organization. And so, is it the right seat for you? Part of the understanding of that is having good self-awareness to be able to say, I fit this role, and I can fit this role in a way that brings life not only to me, but the organization, the community, and the world around me. I think that's really, really critical.
Yep, that's good.
That's a really great question. Is my role meeting legitimate needs within my organization, my community, and my world? I think that's really, really good, Brad.
Yeah.
So that's the first question, and I think that helps us give a understanding of the role. Now let's talk about how you fit in that role, and take us into question number 2.
Yeah, so I think after we ask that question, like you said, it's kind of like pouring down the cement. We're building the foundation, and I think that kind of sobers us up, that actually, wow, I'm making an impact. And therefore, that kind of siphons discontentment out of our lives.
Sure.
But then we want to ask the second question. This is where it gets really poignant, and where you're talking about self-awareness, this is really important for this question. Am I actually good at what I do? Am I actually good at what I do?
Well, of course I am, Brad. That's why I have the job. Of
course, we all think we're awesome. Jeff, we know this. It's possible to be passionate about something but not very good at it.
That's very true.
And we know a lot of people like that who are just fired up about something, but man, they're not very good at it. Mm-hmm. And as a result, it serves no one. Just a couple examples. I mean, I love basketball. I love it, but I'm not very good at it. Like I can crush a lot of people. And we have a live audience here. My brother's here, and he knows that I can crush him. And other than that,
horse.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. But outside of that, I'm not awesome at it. Mm-hmm. I'm not very good at it. So for me to give my life to become a NBA player, would not serve many people. Another example that just kind of comes to the top of my mind. I mean,
Top of
Jeff,
your
you
mind.
love golf,
I do.
but you're not very good at it. And and I hope your wife's listening to this
She
because
probably
she
isn't.
will say yes
Maybe she
and
is.
amen. But you get the point. I know we're jesting around. This is a problem. I think people are very passionate about certain things, but they're not very good at it. The question we have to ask is, what am I actually good at?
Mm-hmm.
And in my current role, am I actually good at what I'm getting paid to do? Or to ask it another way, do I have God-given skills to accomplish what I've been asked to do? And then here's the kicker. Do others affirm that?
Mm-hmm.
Because if we live in a silo, we were joking on the outset, but it's true. If we live in a silo and we think we're good at something, but the other people around us actually talk behind the scenes and are like, yeah, that person's not very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
But we never ask them, say, hey, can you, am I good at this or not?
Mm-hmm.
If we never do that, we can be literally the people that we're talking about in this podcast.
Absolutely.
People who are passionate about something and not very good at it. This is why this question is a community project.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have other people that say, hey, I want to affirm this in you. When you did that, when you led that project, when you led that team, when you did that meeting, when you gave that speech, all these things, that was incredible. And I couldn't do that. It was amazing. You're good at that. We need people to tell us that, because then it helps us ask or answer the question that we've been asking. Am I actually good at what I'm getting paid to do?
Sure. And I think what Clay Scroggins has said in his book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, and I heard him do a couple of podcast episodes with Andy Stanley on his leadership podcast. What would you, if you were me, what would you do differently? That's the question he asks. If you were me, what would you do differently? And it's a question of evaluation, but it's an invitation.
Yeah.
It's an invitation saying, listen, you have an angle on my life and my work that I don't have. Help me see from your perspective how I could be more effective in the things that I'm doing. And what that reveals to you is those blind spots, right? Those areas that maybe you think you're good at, but you're not. And I think that there's a couple of critical things here. One, you've got to take the emotions out of this conversation. So the way to do that is to get trusted people into this community effort. You're totally right. It's a community project question, and the only way it works is if you have trusted individuals who you can say, you can fight the emotional line. Because when you invite someone in to evaluate you, that's hard. That's why the Bible says that as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens another man. It is a difficult conversation to hear you're not very good at this element of your job or the thing that you might even think that you're good at, but you're passionate about it. And so I think it's important to eliminate the emotions, and you do that by bringing trusted people around the table. And so perhaps for some people who are listening, that's 5 people. For some people, that's 2.
Yep.
I think the question that you have to ask yourself is, am I getting a full picture of all the things that I'm responsible for?
Yep.
So if I'm responsible as a youth pastor for leading leaders, for connecting with students, and equipping parents, those are just a few things that I'm responsible for, then I better have some eyes on how well am I doing those things,
right,
and people who can speak into those things. The other thing is, and I think that this goes to understand what you're good at versus what you're required to do, right? There's parts of everybody's job that they enjoy. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. There's an element that keeps you in the role that you're in. And if it's just money, then we should have a conversation about that. You can go back and listen to, one of the previous episodes when it comes to finding and leading yourself well. But there are some things that we have to do in our organizations that are required because of the role that we play or the organization we're in. And then there are some things that we get to do. And I think that pressing into that is really, really important. What are the things that you get to do, that you enjoy doing? Because those are going to be the things that you're probably going to find more fulfillment in. But how much of the things that you're frustrated about the role you're in and the seat you're in, if you're frustrated, I guess we shouldn't assume that you are. We should assume you're just trying to have a seat. But if you're frustrated in the seat you're in, are the things that you have to do, like, how does that balance out? Because I think it's really easy to have this conversation and say, well, Brad, I'm really good at these 3 things, and I hate doing these 5 things. But in order to do these 3 things and have the role you have to do those 5 things.
Yep.
You may not like writing monthly board reports, kind of like me, if I'm just being honest, because I'm like, yep, these are the things that I did. I could just give you a calendar. I'm kidding. But what it does is the function of it is to inform our board of directors or board of deacons, here's what the high school pastor's been doing.
Yep.
So in order for me to meet with students, to equip leaders, to connect with parents, to facilitate ministry opportunities and do the things that I do, guess what I get to do every month? I have the opportunity to inform my board of deacons every month. As much as I may chagrin that half hour or hour of putting that all together, I do it. And I think there's a difference between the things that frustrate me about my job and the things that I have to do in order to do what I want to do. And so navigating that conversation, I think, is really, really critical. I think these 2 questions give you some perspective to say, okay, am I in the right seat? And if I am, what are the things I have to do that I don't like to do that I'm going to do so I can do what I want to do?
Yeah.
And I think that those are 2 critical little things to add into the conversation and say, listen, like, you've got to do these things so you can keep doing the things that you want to do.
That's right. Well, Jeff, this is a poignant conversation for backseat leaders who are wrestling with, should I stay or should I go? And I think that we tend to undervalue the impact that we're currently making in the lives of people. We tend to undervalue that, and we tend to overvalue the impact we could have in a spot somewhere else. And I think that's helpful for us to remember. I think that's what these 2 questions are getting at. Am I meeting legitimate needs right now? And if I am I good at meeting those legitimate needs? And if I am, man, doesn't mean you're going to be in that spot forever.
Yeah.
But you're in the right spot. You're meeting needs, and you're good at what you do.
Yeah.
And hopefully that could provide some encouragement for people who are listening today.
Brad, if there was one thing, we have a few minutes here. If there was one thing that you would say, because you've transitioned roles a couple times in your ministry career. If there was one thing that maybe was a helpful question, deciding factor that helped you know this next spot is, I mean, obviously you can't go into the details of, well, I was able to do this and I was going to be different.
Right.
And we don't want to have that conversation. That's a different time. But if there was one evaluative, like, man, I know this is the right move for me. What was one thing to say? Or maybe there was, I mean, because you had opportunities you could have gone to that you've turned down.
Right.
How do I know? How do you know that, like, right now you're in the best seat you can be in right now?
Yeah. I think, it's a simple answer, but it really goes back to these 2 questions. I think something I would ask myself is, hey, how high is the ceiling at the place I'm at? And am I hitting my head on the ceiling, or am I hitting my head on discontentment? And I think
previous podcast episode on.
That's right, that you should listen to. And I think for me, it's just realizing, wow, like, I'm making an impact in the lives of people where I'm at, and I'm good at what I do. But I want to grow as a leader, and I don't think I can grow as much as I could elsewhere. And so therefore that kind of opened up the door to some conversations and led to a transition. And I think it's really hard to know when to pull the trigger on that. And I wanted to be real sure I was not moving too soon, because I think that's a backseat leader's tendency, is probably to move too soon.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think for me at the time, looking back, I knew after a long period of talking to other people, really praying about it, thinking about it, reflecting upon it, it's like, I'm hitting my head on the ceiling, and I don't think I'm going to grow as much as I can as a leader here versus somewhere else, and moved on. And you know what? It's proved to be true. I've grown as a leader substantially since I made that transition, and in ways that I couldn't have, I don't think, if I stayed.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
So Jeff, we in every podcast episode, we try to talk about one thing you're reading, one thing you love, things like that. And today we're going to talk about something that you have been loving lately, the one thing you love. So take us away. What's something that you've been loving recently that you want to share with our audience?
Well, I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but I do.
Other than this one.
Other than this one, which I do every time it comes out.
Every single time.
Multiple times, because I love to evaluate my own voice.
Yes.
But one of the podcasts that I absolutely love listening to, and he's a youth pastor, and he served at his original church for, I'm going to forget now. He was into his third decade, so it was 20 plus years at the same church. He's a good friend of mine. His name's Derry Prankert, and he operates a podcast called My Third Decade with Derry Prankert. And he's now serving at a different church. He's only served at 2 different churches in his professional ministry career. Is that what we call it? We'll call it that.
Yep, sounds good to me.
And he's now at a place called Southeast Christian Church and leading the youth ministry down there. And I have just, especially when it comes to this conversation about knowing your role, his podcast is purposed to help the youth pastor, because the youth pastors, you want to talk about a leader that rotates quite a bit. I mean, that moves a lot.
Yes.
Classically. And his goal is to help youth pastors really consider what it means to stay longer. And I think there's some incredible principles in it that have nothing to do with youth ministry, that have everything to do with how do I know that I can stay? Because I think you're right. I think that we can very easily go, oh, see ya.
Yep.
I don't like what's going on. See ya. I'll find something new. Derry's podcast is so good. Plus, he tells incredible youth ministry stories. And if you haven't been around youth ministry for any amount of time, it is a wonderful world. And it is a wonderful thing to be a part of. And it's an easy thing to be a part of because youth ministries across the country are doing a great job of raising up ministry models that allow people who are not serving in full-time ministry to do full-time like ministry, which I love.
Yeah.
And so Derry's podcast, My Third Decade, goes through some of those principles, really wrestles with the question, is it time for me to leave or is it time for me to stay?
Yeah. And
presses you to stay because of the value of longevity. And I think that's critical for any backseat leader.
Awesome.
And so I would encourage you, like, you need something light, you need something but also helpful. I would press into that conversation. My Third Decade with Derry Prankert. It's a great
awesome.
podcast. I love it.
I just subscribed.
Did you?
I did.
Nice. Proud of you. Brad, we're really close to our time. We actually have a couple seconds here, and here's what I'd like to do, Brad. We're in the summer months now. We are kind of just looking towards the freedom and the fun of summer.
Yes.
What is one thing you're excited about for the summertime right now?
Oh, well, I had a sewer line replaced, and my backyard looks like a T-Rex had a recess hour. And so, as a result, I want to plant grass.
Yes.
And I'm so excited.
I would be excited for that too.
Yeah, I'm not. But it's I'm looking forward to having my yard back.
Yeah.
So it's a necessary evil.
Yeah. I hear you there. I'm just going to go play golf that I'm not very good at.
Yeah, you are.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, you are. I can teach you.
Can you?
No, I can't.
Let's go back to the last time we were at Topgolf.
Nope, let's not.
We won't go the last time I was at Topgolf when my wife beat me 3 out of 4 games.
Destroyed you.
It was rough. It was
good.
rough. Brad, man, we're excited for what's coming up in the fall, too. So be on the lookout. Number of interviews that are coming in the fall. I can't tell you who they are yet because...
Great guests, though. We're excited.
We're really excited about them. And since COVID is beginning to release, we can have those conversations.
Yep.
And we would love to hear from the audience. We'd love to hear from our team, our group of people who follow along. So hit us up. Send us a question. Contact us. Social media at Backseat Leader or at backseatleadership.com, backseatleader.com. We'd love to hear from you because there's plenty of people out there who are talking about leadership for the 90% who are in the back seat. And not the 10% who are in the front seat. So hit us up. We'd love to talk about those things, ask questions, press into those things. And we'd love to hear from you because we love our people. We love our people. They're awesome.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's true.
Any parting words, Brad, before we wrap up this episode of the Backseat Leadership Podcast?
It's been real. It's been fun.
But you're hungry.
And it's been real fun.
And it's time for lunch.
It is time for lunch.
Thanks, guys, for being a part. We'll see you next time on the Backseat Leadership Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave a review to help other backseat leaders join the conversation. For more information, visit www.backseatleader.com.